The mountain valley was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy rather than peaceful, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Thick clouds drifted lazily across the sky, casting slow-moving shadows over jagged cliffs that plunged thousands of feet into darkness. A narrow hiking path clung to the edge of one such cliff, barely wide enough for a single person to walk safely. Small stones littered the ground, loosened by years of wind and rain, waiting for a single careless step to send them dancing into the endless void below. It was here, at the edge of this terrifying beauty, that a young woman named Eliza came seeking peace, unaware that she was walking toward the most frightening moment of her life. Eliza had always loved nature for its honesty. The mountains did not lie to you, she believed, they showed you both beauty and danger without apology. She was a photographer, traveling alone most of the time, searching for moments that could never be staged. That morning, she had followed an unmarked trail after spotting a rare mountain falcon soaring across the sky. Her camera hung from her neck as she shivered in the cold wind, stepping carefully along the narrow ledge. What she did not know was that the ground beneath her right foot had already begun to crack silently under her weight, weakened by invisible fractures that only time and fate had prepared. The first sound of danger was hardly noticeable, a faint crunch beneath her boot that blended into the whisper of the wind. Eliza froze instantly, every muscle in her body tightening as she looked down. Tiny pebbles slipped free and vanished over the edge, falling so far that no sound of impact ever returned. Her heart began pounding violently against her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a warning drum. Slowly, carefully, she tried to shift her weight backward, but the narrowness of the path gave her no room to maneuver. Every movement felt like a risky negotiation with gravity itself. Panic is not loud at first, it creeps in quietly, tightening the chest, fogging the mind. Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for a nearby rock face, trying to anchor herself. The cold stone scraped her fingers as she searched for a solid grip. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, and she could feel her knees beginning to weaken. Somewhere deep inside, logic told her not to panic, not to rush, but fear is rarely interested in reason. The wind suddenly surged through the mountain pass, pushing against her back as if an unseen force were testing her balance. Miles away, in a small rescue outpost near the forest edge, a powerful German shepherd named Rex lifted his head with sudden intensity. Rex was no ordinary dog. He had spent years training with the mountain search and rescue team, learning how to track fear, how to sense danger, how to move toward suffering instead of away from it. At that moment, his handler, Mark, noticed the change in the dog's posture, the way his ears stood rigid, the way his muscles tightened as if responding to a silent command. Rex let out a low, uneasy whine, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Mark had learned to trust that sound. Over the years, it had led them to lost hikers, buried survivors, and people who had already lost hope. Without asking questions, he clipped on Rex's leash and stepped outside. But before they had taken more than a few steps, Rex lunged forward with such force that the leash burned through Mark's gloved hand. The dog bolted toward the forest, driven by an urgency that felt almost supernatural. Mark swore under his breath and ran after him, his heart pounding with the same strange instinct that told him something was terribly wrong. Back on the cliff, Eliza's situation worsened with terrifying speed. As she shifted her weight slightly, the cracked section of rock gave way another inch. Her right foot sank lower, wedged awkwardly between two unstable stones. A sharp pain shot through her ankle as the strain twisted her leg at an unnatural angle. She cried out reflexively, her voice being torn apart by the howling wind before it could travel far. Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers and dropped into the abyss, spinning briefly in the air before disappearing forever into the darkness below. The loss of the phone felt like the loss of her final connection to the world. No signal. No call for help. Just her, the cliff, and the terrifying depth beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, freezing slightly as the cold wind lashed against her skin. She tried to pull her trapped foot out, but every attempt only loosened the surrounding stones further. Each tiny movement sent fresh pebbles tumbling downward like a countdown to something far more final. In the distance, Rex tore through underbrush and rocky terrain, his powerful legs eating up the ground with desperate speed. Thorns scratched against his sides, branches whipped across his face, but nothing slowed him. Mark struggled behind, lungs burning, calling out to Rex even though he knew the dog would not stop. Every instinct inside the dog screamed that a life was slipping away at that very moment. The mountains were no longer just stone and snow to him. They were a battlefield, and somewhere on that battlefield, a human was losing her fight. Eliza's strength began to fail. The pain in her ankle intensified, turning sharp and unbearable. Her arms shook violently as she clung to the cold rock wall. Below her, the abyss seemed to grow wider, darker, and more certain with every passing second. The roar of the wind blended with her sobs as she whispered a broken prayer into the emptiness. She did not know that far below, on twisting hidden trails and through ancient trees, a German shepherd was already running toward her with death itself trying desperately to outrun him. And as the first distant echo of paws struck stone far behind her on the mountain path, Eliza's foot slipped just enough to remind the universe how fragile a single human life truly is. The sound that changed everything was not loud. It was a soft, brittle crack, barely louder than the snap of a dry twig underfoot. Yet in that single fragile sound, the mountain made its final decision about Eliza's fate. The loose stone beneath her trapped foot finally gave in, collapsing inward with terrifying ease. Her body lurched forward violently, her grip on the rock face slipping as gravity yanked her toward the abyss. For one frozen heartbeat, she hovered between standing and falling, suspended in a horrifying balance where even the wind seemed to pause and watch. Then her other foot lost its grip. Eliza screamed as her body slammed forward, her stomach crashing against the hard edge of the narrow ledge. The impact knocked the air clean out of her lungs in a sharp, burning burst. Pain exploded through her ribs, her shoulder, her twisted ankle. The world tilted violently as her upper body slid over the edge while her back legs remained tangled in loose stones. Below her, the abyss yawned open like a massive, hungry mouth. Nothing but swirling fog and endless emptiness stared back at her collapsing strength. Her backpack, heavy with camera equipment, caught momentarily on a jagged rock. That single snag became the only thing stopping her from vanishing into nothingness. The strap cut painfully into her shoulders as the weight of her body pulled downward. Eliza clawed desperately at the rock with both hands, her fingernails scraping until they burned raw. She could feel tiny stones raining past her face, bouncing off her cheeks and disappearing below. Each falling pebble sounded like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds she had left. Her mind shattered into chaos. Memories flooded her thoughts without mercy, her mother's laugh, her father teaching her how to ride a bike, the first photograph she had ever taken, the promise she once made to herself that she would live boldly without fear. All of it collided inside her head as terror squeezed her chest so tightly she could barely think. She tried to scream again, but only a broken, breathless sob escaped her lips. The mountain swallowed the sound without answer. Blood began to drip from her scraped fingers, smearing dark red streaks across the pale stone. Her arms trembled violently under the strain of holding her own body weight. The backpack strap stretched dangerously, fibers slowly tearing one by one with quiet snapping sounds that felt louder than thunder in her ears. Eliza felt time slowing down in the most cruel way possible, each second stretching like an eternity of dread. She could no longer tell whether the shaking she felt came from the cold, exhaustion, or pure fear. Far behind her on the trail, Rex burst out of the fog at full speed. His powerful chest heaved with every breath, steam pouring from his mouth into the freezing air. The moment his sharp eyes locked onto the horrifying scene ahead, something primal erupted inside him. He did not hesitate. He did not slow down. His paws struck stone with explosive force as he raced toward the edge where a human life dangled helplessly above death. Mark's voice echoed from somewhere behind Rex, shouting his name with raw panic and confusion. But Rex no longer heard anything but the pounding of his own heartbeat and the desperate sound of fabric tearing in the distance. The dog's instincts had become sharper than any command. He leapt over fallen rocks, skidded around narrow bends, his claws scraping sparks from stone as he closed the final terrifying distance. Eliza's strength finally began to fail. Her muscles screamed in protest as her grip weakened by painful inches. Her vision blurred from tears and lack of oxygen. She felt the backpack strap jerk violently as another thread snapped. The sound was soft, but to her, it echoed like a gunshot. She knew with terrifying clarity that if the strap failed completely, there would be no second chance. No rescue. No miracle. Just endless falling. She whispered goodbye into the freezing wind. Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself. Her lips trembled as she mouthed the words through silent sobs. The abyss below felt closer now, as if it were rising to meet her. Her fingers finally began to slide over the smooth rock face, leaving behind streaks of blood and sweat that failed to stop her descent. Then, in the final moment when her hands were about to lose their last hold, a sudden, powerful force slammed into her backpack from above. Rex crashed into her with the full momentum of his running leap, his jaws clamping down on the thick strap with iron strength. The impact jolted Eliza's body violently upward, stopping her fall by a fraction of a second. Her entire weight swung beneath him as the abyss roared in frustration below. Dust exploded into the air. Stone shifted. Time shattered into pure chaos. Hanging over the edge, her life now suspended between the crushing pull of gravity and the unbreakable grip of a German shepherd, Eliza realized with breathtaking disbelief that death had been stopped, but it had not been defeated yet. Rex's powerful body slammed against the rocky ground as the full weight of Eliza's life pulled against his jaws. The sudden force nearly ripped him forward into the abyss with her, and for a terrifying instant, both of them slid several inches toward the edge together. Loose stones burst from beneath his paws, tumbling noisily into the darkness below. The strap of the backpack groaned under unbearable pressure, stretched to its absolute limit. Eliza's body swung helplessly in the air, spinning slightly as she screamed in terror, convinced that both of them would vanish together into the depths. Rex dug his claws into the gravel with desperate force. His muscles bulged and trembled as he fought gravity with every fiber of his body. Pain tore through his jaw as the rough strap cut into his gums, but he did not release his grip for even a fraction of a second. His teeth locked tighter, his growl vibrating through his chest like a battle cry against the mountain itself. Dust filled the air around them as rock continued to crumble beneath his struggling paws. Behind him, Mark reached the edge of the trail at last, but the sight in front of him froze his blood cold. He saw Rex sliding inch by inch toward the abyss, his back legs slipping wildly as the loose ground betrayed him. He saw the woman swinging helplessly below the edge, her life hanging from the dog's jaws alone. Mark dropped to his knees, terror clawing at his chest as he realized how close they were to losing everything. Mark tried to move forward, but the unstable path shifted violently under his weight. Each careful step threatened to send all three of them crashing down together. He lowered himself flat to the ground, crawling inch by inch, reaching desperately for Rex's back legs while shouting encouragement through a choking voice. The wind tore his words away, but Rex did not need to hear him. The dog's entire focus was locked on one mission: do not let go. Eliza's arms burned with unbearable pain as she tried to reach upward toward the edge. Her fingers scraped uselessly against stone that remained just beyond her reach. Blood dripped steadily from her hands, splashing downward into nothingness. Her vision blurred as dizziness overtook her. Faces from her past flashed through her fading thoughts: her family, her childhood friends, the life she had once taken for granted. She whispered Rex's name even though she had never heard it spoken before, as if saying it might anchor her to the world above. Rex's grip began to weaken. Not from fear, but from the crushing exhaustion tearing through his body. His legs shook violently, his breathing coming in ragged, labored bursts. His paws slid again as another section of earth gave way beneath him. This time, his body slipped halfway toward the edge. His hind legs dangled dangerously close to empty air. The abyss roared louder now, as if it could taste victory. Mark lunged forward with everything he had. His fingers caught Rex's back leg just as the dog nearly lost his final footing. The sudden tug nearly dislocated Mark's shoulder, but he held on with raw desperation. Man and dog were now locked together, both straining against the pulling force of death below. The mountain groaned under the pressure of the struggle. Pebbles rained down around them like a warning from nature itself. For a horrifying moment, it seemed gravity would win. Rex let out a strained cry as his jaw muscles spasmed under the pain. The strap shifted inside his mouth, slick with sweat and blood. Eliza felt a sudden, terrifying drop as the fabric tore another inch. She screamed in absolute despair, her voice breaking as she felt herself dip lower into the abyss. Something inside Rex changed in that instant. Not fear, not panic, just unbreakable defiance. With a guttural roar, he twisted his body sideways across the narrow ledge, slamming his shoulder hard into the rock wall. The brutal movement sent a jolt through his entire body, but it anchored him. His weight redistributed across the ground, his claws finding a new, firmer hold. The sudden shift stopped the sliding. The mountain fell silent again. Dust settled slowly through the air like falling ash. Eliza's body jerked upward slightly as the tension stabilized. For the first time since the fall, nothing moved. The abyss waited below, but it was no longer pulling them closer. Mark collapsed forward, still gripping Rex's leg with shaking hands. Tears streamed from his eyes as relief and terror collided inside his chest. He leaned down close to Rex's head, pressing his forehead against the dog's fur as he whispered broken words of gratitude and encouragement. Rex's body trembled violently beneath him, but his jaws never released the strap. Above the roaring wind and the silent abyss, one truth became painfully clear: death had not been defeated yet, but for the first time since the fall, it had been forced to stop advancing. The moment the mountain fell silent after Rex anchored himself sideways, it felt as if the entire world had stopped breathing. Eliza hung there, suspended between life and the roaring darkness below, her chest heaving in shallow, terrified gasps. Her fingers were numb, her arms screaming with unbearable pain, and her vision swam as tears blurred everything around her. Above her, Rex's powerful body trembled violently against the rock wall, every muscle in his frame stretched beyond its limit. Mark lay flat on the ledge behind him, still gripping the dog's back leg with both hands, too afraid to even blink. One wrong movement could send all of them into the abyss together. Mark forced himself to think through the panic crushing his chest. Carefully, inch by inch, he adjusted his grip and reached for the emergency rope tied around his waist. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely untangle it. With slow, trembling precision, he looped the rope around Rex's harness and secured the knot with fingers that felt like they no longer belonged to him. The moment the rope tightened, Rex's body shifted slightly, and Eliza felt a faint upward pull for the first time since she had fallen. It was barely noticeable, but it was hope. Below them, the abyss waited in cold, patient silence. Eliza closed her eyes and whispered soft, broken words into the wind, not knowing whether they were prayers or farewells. The pain in her shoulders and ribs had become so intense that her body felt distant, as if it no longer truly belonged to her. Every breath burned. Every second felt like an hour. But then she felt the rope tighten again. Another tiny upward movement followed. The realization that she was actually being lifted sent a wave of emotion crashing through her so powerful it almost made her lose consciousness. Mark braced his feet against the rock and leaned backward with all his strength. The rope cut painfully into his palms as he pulled. Rex growled low from deep within his chest, not in anger but in effort, his body shaking violently as he continued to hold the backpack strap with unbreakable determination. Together, man and dog pulled in agonizing, slow rhythm: pull, hold, breathe, pull again. With each movement, Eliza rose another inch higher from the mouth of the abyss. Her fingers finally brushed solid stone. The moment she felt the rock beneath her hands again, she sobbed uncontrollably. She dug her nails into the surface with desperate gratitude, clinging to it as if it were the last real thing left in the world. Mark shouted encouragement through tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking with every word. Rex's eyes never left Eliza's position. His jaws bled, his muscles trembled violently, but his grip never loosened. The backpack strap groaned loudly under the strain, threads tearing one after another with sickening snaps that echoed across the silent mountainside. Mark saw it happening and knew they were running out of time. With a desperate cry, he shifted his weight and pulled with everything he had left. Rex growled in the same instant and leaned backward with brutal force, his body scraping painfully against the rock wall as he fought gravity with his entire being. Eliza felt herself surge upward several inches in one sudden motion. Her chest slammed against the ledge, knocking the air from her lungs in a violent gasp. She coughed and choked as she struggled to breathe, her legs still dangling over the abyss while her upper body rested against the cold stone. Hands, human hands, suddenly grabbed her wrists with desperate strength. Mark leaned forward, clutching her arms with everything he had, his face twisted in raw determination and fear. With one final, agonizing pull, man and dog worked together in perfect, desperate unity. Eliza's body slid fully onto the narrow path, her legs dragging free of the abyss at last. The instant she was safe on solid ground, Rex finally released the backpack strap from his jaws and collapsed forward onto the stone with a low, exhausted groan. Mark fell beside him, dropping the rope as his entire body began to shake uncontrollably. Eliza lay flat on the cold rock, gasping for air as sobs tore from her chest in uncontrollable waves. She pressed her trembling hands against the ground as if afraid it might disappear beneath her again. Every part of her body ached, but she was alive. Alive. The word echoed inside her mind like a miracle she could not yet believe. She turned her head weakly and saw Rex lying a few feet away, blood staining the fur around his mouth and paws. Despite his injuries, Rex lifted his head the moment he saw her moving. His tired eyes locked onto hers, and his tail thumped weakly once against the stone. The simple movement shattered something inside Eliza. She dragged herself across the ground toward him, ignoring the pain screaming through her body. With trembling hands, she pressed her forehead gently against his and whispered words that carried more gratitude than sound could ever express. Mark watched them through tears he no longer tried to hide. His chest heaved with silent sobs as he realized they had done the impossible. The mountain, which only moments before had been a place of death, now felt like sacred ground. The wind softened around them. The abyss below remained dark and endless, but it no longer felt victorious. For the first time since the fall, death had truly been pushed back. And in that quiet moment on a narrow ledge between earth and sky, 3 lives lay trembling on stone, bound together forever by terror, courage, and a miracle written in blood and loyalty. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness as Mark carefully wrapped her in a thermal blanket and checked her injuries with shaking hands. The cold had sunk deep into her bones, and every breath felt like fire in her chest, but she was alive, and the truth alone felt unreal. Above them, the clouds slowly began to part for the first time that day, allowing thin rays of sunlight to spill across the jagged rock face. The light touched Rex's bloodied paws and Eliza's trembling hands at the same time, as if the mountain itself were quietly acknowledging what had just happened. The rescue team arrived minutes later, though to Eliza it felt like a lifetime had passed. Strong hands lifted her onto a stretcher, securing her carefully as they prepared to lower her back along the dangerous trail. As she was carried away, her eyes never left Rex. Even in her dizziness, she reached out weakly toward him. Rex struggled to stand despite his injuries, his body swaying with exhaustion, but his tail wagged slowly and steadily. It was not the excited wag of victory, it was the quiet, steady rhythm of a promise kept. At the base of the mountain, doctors rushed Eliza into an ambulance while another medical team surrounded Rex. Mark stayed between them for a long moment, unable to choose who needed him more. Eliza cried as she watched them clean blood from Rex's fur and bandage his torn paws and injured jaw. The guilt tried to rise inside her, but it was smothered by a deeper emotion, gratitude so heavy it made her chest ache. She whispered his name again as the ambulance doors closed, holding onto consciousness as if she were holding onto him. Days passed in a haze of painkillers, stitches, and whispered conversations in quiet hospital corridors. Eliza survived multiple fractures, deep lacerations, and severe shock, but the doctors told her again and again that what she had lived through should have been impossible. Mark visited when he could, bringing updates about Rex each time. The dog had lost blood and torn muscle in his jaw, but he was healing, slowly, stubbornly, the same way he had fought on the mountain. Every time Eliza heard this, tears ran silently down her face. Weeks later, when Eliza could finally stand on her own again, Mark took her to the rescue center. Her steps were unsteady as she walked across the yard with a cane in one hand and her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She did not know what she expected, the hero of her miracle, the savior of her life, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment Rex came around the corner. His jaw still bore scars. His paws moved with a careful stiffness. But his eyes were the same, steady, loyal, and filled with recognition. Eliza dropped to her knees despite the pain the movement sent through her body. She opened her arms, and Rex crossed the yard with slow, deliberate steps before pressing his head into her chest. The sob that tore from Eliza's throat was loud and uncontrollable, a sound that carried weeks of fear, gratitude, survival, and awe all at once. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck and held him as if the world might take him away if she let go. For a long time, neither of them moved. The story spread quickly. Locals spoke of the German shepherd who had fought gravity and won. Hikers left flowers at the trailhead where the fall had happened. Children drew pictures of a giant dog standing like a warrior at the edge of a cliff. To many, the mountain had always been a symbol of danger. Now, it was a symbol of something else entirely, proof that even in the most merciless places, loyalty could still carve out miracles. Months later, on a clear morning warmed by gentle sunlight, Eliza returned to the mountain with Mark and Rex beside her. She did not go anywhere near the edge. This time. Instead, she stood on solid ground and looked out across the valley with tears in her eyes. The wind whispered through the rocks just as it had on the day she almost died, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a memory. At the memorial stone placed near the trail, Eliza knelt and placed the medal she had commissioned around Rex's neck. It was engraved with simple words, "To the one who pushed death back." Rex sat calmly as the cold metal touched his fur, unaware of its meaning, yet perfectly aware of the hands that once trembled in the abyss and now trembled only with gratitude. Mark stood beside them in silence, his face tight with emotion he did not try to hide. Eliza never climbed that trail again, but she did not fear the mountains anymore. She spent the rest of her life telling the story, not as one of terror, but as one of hope. In every photograph she took after that day, there was something new hiding behind her lens, an understanding of how close life always is to the edge, and how powerful a single loyal heart can be when it chooses to stand between a human soul and the fall. High in the silent valley, the wind still howls and stones still break away into darkness. The abyss is as deep and merciless as ever. But the mountain now carries a story etched into its shadow, a story of a life that once dangled over nothing, and a German shepherd who refused to let the world claim it. And that is how, on a narrow ledge between earth and sky, death was pushed back by loyalty, courage, and a miracle with 4 wounded paws.